The wind on the Montana plains doesn't just whisper, it screams. It howls with the memory of promises broken and lives lost. For Eliza Barrow, a widow clinging to the last vestiges of her husband's dream, that wind was a constant, lonely companion. But on the night of the great storm, it brought something more than rain and fury. It brought a man, a stranger, with eyes that held secrets as dark as the thunderclouds overhead. She offered him shelter, a simple act of mercy against the tempest. But mercy in the West is a currency rarely traded for free. By morning, the storm outside had passed, but a far greater one was about to break right inside her own home, beginning with a single unbelievable request that would change everything he'd sent for a preacher. The sky over the Bighorn Valley had been the color of a bad bruise all afternoon. Eliza Barrow watched it from the porch of her small, sturdy cabin, a hand shielding her eyes from the dust that swirled in agitated spirals across the yard. The air, thick and unnaturally still, carried the scent of rain and ozone, a promise of violence. Her late husband Samuel had taught her how to read the sky. He'd say the land always tells you what's coming, if you're patient enough to listen. Today the land wasn't just talking, it was screaming a warning. Her homestead was an island in a vast rolling sea of prairie grass and rock. The nearest town, Redemption, was a hard 10-mile ride away, a distance that felt like 100 on days like this. Since Samuel's passing from the fever 2 years prior, that isolation had become both a comfort and a curse. It was a shield from the pitying glances of the townfolk and the predatory gaze of men like Cyrus Griffith, but it was a heavy shield to bear alone. Every plank of the cabin, every post in the fence, every furrow in the small vegetable patch was soaked in Samuel's sweat and her own. It was their legacy, a stubborn testament to a shared dream carved out of an unforgiving wilderness, and she would rather burn it to the ground than let it go. As the first fat, cold drops of rain began to fall, she herded the last of her chickens into their coop, latched the gate to the small corral, where her mare Gracie stood nervously, and secured the heavy barn door. The wind was picking up now, a low moan that escalated into a piercing shriek as it tore through the cottonwoods lining the creek bed. This was no ordinary summer shower. This was a beast. Inside the cabin felt like the heart of a drum. Rain hammered against the roof, and the wind rattled the window panes in their frames. Eliza lit a second lantern, casting a warm, flickering glow over the simple room. A stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, and a shelf of well-worn books. It was a sparse existence, but it was hers. She put a pot of coffee on the stove, the familiar aroma a small act of defiance against the chaos outside. It was the frantic, desperate pounding that nearly made her drop the pot. It wasn't the rhythmic knock of a neighbor. It was the sound of a fist against wood, a panicked, urgent drumming that was almost lost in the symphony of the storm. Her heart leaped into her throat. No one should be out in this. Her first instinct was fear. An outlaw, a drunk from one of the camps in the hills. She reached for the shotgun. Samuel had left her, its cold, heavy weight a grim reassurance as she moved toward the door. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice tight. A man's voice, rough and strained, was whipped away by the wind, but she caught a few words. "Shelter. The storm. Please." She hesitated, her thumb on the shotgun's hammer. The world was full of men who saw a woman alone as an opportunity. But the storm was a monster, a thing without mercy. To leave even a dog out in it was a death sentence. Taking a deep breath, She slid the bolt back, opened the door a crack, and peered out, the shotgun held ready, but out of sight. The man who stood on her porch looked like he had been wrestling with the storm and lost. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and soaked to the bone, his dark duster clinging to his frame. Rain streamed from the brim of his hat and plastered his dark hair to his forehead. He was leaning heavily against the doorframe, and in the flickering lamplight, she could see a gash on his temple, a thin line of crimson diluted by the rain. His face was all harsh angles and shadow, but his eyes, when he lifted his head, were startlingly clear and desperate. "Ma'am," he rasped, his breathing ragged. "My horse went lame, threw me about a mile back. I saw your light. I won't cause no trouble, just a place out of this wind." Eliza's gaze was sharp, analytical. He wore a gun belt low on his hips, the handle of the Colt worn smooth. He was a drifter, that much was clear. But there was something else in his posture, a weariness that went deeper than the storm. It was the posture of a man who had been running for a long time. Her mind screamed at her to slam the door, to bolt it, to trust the safety of her solitude. But her heart, the part of her that remembered Samuel's kindness, saw only a man at the mercy of the elements. "Get in," she said, her voice firmer than she felt, "before you're struck by lightning." She stepped back, holding the door open. He stumbled inside, bringing the cold and the wet, with him dripping a puddle onto her clean-swept floorboards. He took off his hat, his manners at odds with his rough appearance. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm indebted to you," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to fill the small space. "Take off that duster and put it by the hearth," she ordered, all business. "There's coffee on the stove. And don't you even think about touching that pistol." He gave a slow nod, his eyes meeting hers. There was no argument in them, only a flicker of something she couldn't quite read. Amusement, respect. He unbuckled the gun belt with practiced ease and laid it carefully on the floor by the door, far from both of them. Then he shrugged out of the heavy, sodden duster. Underneath he wore a simple shirt that was also soaked through, outlining a powerful chest and broad shoulders. He was leaner than she first thought, toughened by the trail. "My name is Jedediah Stone," he said finally. "Most call me Jed." "Eliza Barrow," she replied, not offering a handshake. She retrieved a clean cloth and a small bowl of water from the wash basin. "Sit down. Let me see to that cut on your head." He sat at the table without protest, his large frame making the chair seem small. She dabbed at the gash, cleaning away the blood and grime. It was a clean cut, but deep. He didn't flinch under her touch, just sat there, watching her with those unnervingly direct eyes. "You're a long way from anywhere, Mrs. Barrow." He observed his voice, quiet. "That's the way I like it," she said. Her tone clipped. She finished cleaning the wound and stepped back. "It'll heal. You were lucky." "Seems my luck is turning," he said, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the neatness, the order, the subtle signs of a woman holding her world together with sheer force of will. She ignored the comment and poured 2 mugs of coffee, placing one in front of him. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the roar of the storm. She sat opposite him, her hands wrapped around her own mug, the shotgun leaning against the wall by her side. A silent chaperone to their strange, forced dinner party. He drank the coffee, his eyes occasionally drifting to the window, as if he could see the ghosts that rode the wind. And Eliza Barrow found herself wondering which was more dangerous, the tempest raging outside her cabin, or the quiet, watchful stranger she had just let inside. The storm howled for hours, a relentless assault that made the world beyond the cabin walls feel like a formless, violent void. Inside, the two lanterns cast long, dancing shadows, turning the small space into an intimate stage. The initial tension between Eliza and Jedediah Stone slowly ebbed, replaced by a strange, shared stillness. There was little to do but wait. Jed was a quiet guest. He drank his coffee, his movements deliberate and economical, as if conserving energy was second nature. He had a stillness about him that Eliza found both unnerving and compelling. It wasn't the placid stillness of a calm man, but the coiled stillness of a predator at rest. "You run this place by yourself?" he asked, breaking a long silence. His voice was soft, but it cut through the noise of the wind. "I manage," Eliza replied, her chin held high. "It's a good piece of land. Strong house. Good water, judging by the creek," he observed. It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment. He spoke like a man who understood the value of such things. "My husband built it. He had an eye for it." The words came out before she could stop them, a small crack in her fortress wall. Jed nodded slowly. A good man, then. The best she said, and a wave of grief, sharp and familiar, washed over her. She busied herself by adding a log to the fire, turning her back to him to hide the sudden sheen in her eyes. To her surprise, he began to talk. Not about himself, not directly, but he told stories of places he'd seen. The Red Rock Canyons of Utah, the sprawling, empty deserts of Arizona, the timber camps in the high Sierras. He spoke with a quiet eloquence, painting pictures with his words. He was a storyteller, and despite herself, Eliza found herself listening, captivated. He was giving her pieces of his journey without ever revealing the map. She, in turn, found herself sharing small things about her own life. The struggle of the first winter, the joy of the first successful harvest, the funny way Samuel had with the animals. They were exchanging carefully curated snippets of their pasts, building a fragile bridge of words over the chasm of their mutual suspicion. His gaze fell upon a piece of paper tacked to the wall near the door, a legal notice from the Griffith Land and Cattle Company. It was torn almost perfectly in half, a testament to her fury the day she received it. "Trouble?" Jed asked, his voice losing its softer edge. Eliza's jaw tightened. "Nothing I can't handle." "Cyrus Griffith is not a man to be trifled with," he said. The statement was flat-heavy with unspoken meaning. "You know him?" she asked, surprised. Redemption was a small town, but Griffith's influence was a long shadow. Jed's expression was unreadable. He looked away from the notice and back to the fire. "I know of him. I know he has an appetite for things that don't belong to him." The way he said it sent a small shiver down Eliza's spine. It wasn't gossip. It was a pronouncement delivered with the weight of personal knowledge. Before she could press him, a particularly violent gust of wind slammed against the cabin, and the world outside was lit by a blinding flash of lightning, followed an instant later by a crack of thunder that shook the very foundations of the house. Gracie Eliza shot to her feet, her face pale. The corral gate. I latched it, but a bolt like that could spook her into breaking it down. Without a second thought, she grabbed a spare oilskin coat from a peg. Jed was on his feet in an instant. "You can't go out in that," he said, his voice a low command. "She's all I have left of him." Eliza choked out the fear for her horse, overriding everything else. "I have to." "Then I'm going with you," he said. No room for argument in his tone. He was already pulling on his still damp duster. "Stay behind me." He unbolted the door and was met with a wall of wind and water that threw him back a step. He lowered his head and pushed into the maelstrom. Eliza followed, clinging to his duster, the world dissolving into a terrifying blur of noise and stinging rain. The short distance to the corral felt like miles. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene in a series of stark, ghostly photographs. The top rail of the fence was splintered, and Gracie was rearing her eyes wide with terror, ready to bolt into the open prairie and the heart of the storm. Jed didn't hesitate. He moved with a speed and confidence that was breathtaking, speaking to the horse in a low, calming murmur. He didn't approach her head-on, but circled his movements fluid and sure. While the storm raged, he seemed to create a small pocket of calm around himself and the terrified animal. He got a hand on her mane, then her bridle stroking her neck, his voice a constant, reassuring rumble. Eliza watched, stunned. This was not the work of a simple drifter. This was the work of a man who knew horses, who understood their fear. In a few moments that felt like an eternity, he had Gracie under control, leading her toward the relative safety of the barn. Together they fought against the wind to haul the heavy barn door open and guide the trembling mare inside. Once the door was barred behind them, the roar of the storm was muffled. They stood in the darkness, panting, the warm, earthy smell of hay and animal filling their lungs. "Thank you, Eliza," said her voice, trembling with relief and something more. "Just returning. A kindness," Jed replied. His face was a shadow in the gloom, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze. The night wore on. The storm eventually exhausted itself, its fury dwindling to a steady, rhythmic drumming on the roof. They returned to the cabin, soaked and cold for a second time. There was no more talk. An unspoken truce had been declared. Eliza gave him a blanket, and he settled into the chair by the fire, insisting she take the bed. Sleep was a long time coming for her. She lay in the darkness, listening to the man's steady breathing. Her mind a whirlwind of confusion. He was a contradiction, a rough-edged wanderer, with the hands of a horseman and the eyes of a hawk. She woke to the pale grey light of dawn. The storm had passed. The silence was profound. For a moment she thought he might be gone, that the whole night had been a fever dream. But he was still there, asleep in the chair, his face softened in repose, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had before. Quietly she rose and went to the window. The world was transformed. The sky was washed clean, and the rising sun painted the clouds in hues of rose and gold. The land was sodden, the creek swollen to a rushing torrent, and a large section of her fence near the pasture was completely flattened. A day's hard labor at least. She turned to find Jed awake watching her. "Morning, Ma'am," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. He stood up, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. "Looks like I owe you more than just a thank you." He gestured with his head toward the broken fence. "I'm handy with a post digger. The least I can do is help you mend what the storm broke." Eliza was about to refuse. It was her problem, her responsibility. But she was so tired. The thought of facing that back-breaking work alone was daunting. "I'd be grateful," she admitted. "I'll need to ride into Redemption," he said, looking down at his worn-out boots. "My horse is still out there, and I'll need to get some new nails from the general store. I can be back before noon." She nodded a part of her, expecting this to be his exit. He would ride to town and just keep riding. It's what drifters did. She watched as he strapped on his gun belt, the easy familiarity of the action, a stark reminder of who he was. He walked to the door, paused and turned back to her. "Mrs. Barrow," he said, his expression serious. "While I'm in town, "Is there anything else you need?" "No." That's all she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. "I'm also going to stop by the church," he said, his tone matter of fact. "I'm sending a message for Reverend Michael to ride out here. Tell him to come as soon as he can." Eliza stared at him, utterly bewildered. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The preacher. Why on earth would you do that? Jedediah Stone looked at her, his face a mask of grim determination. A dozen possible explanations flew through her mind. Was he injured worse than she thought? Had the storm rattled his senses? Because he said, his voice low and steady, a stone dropping into a deep well. "When he gets here, I'm going to ask him to marry us." The words hung in the air of the small cabin, more shocking than the thunderclap that had shaken the house the night before. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. She stared at Jedediah Stone, certain she had misheard. Certain this was some cruel joke born of exhaustion and the strangeness of the storm. "Marry us," she finally managed to whisper the words, feeling foreign and absurd on her tongue. "Have you lost your mind?" "No, ma'am," he said, his expression unyielding. "I reckon I'm just now finding it. There's a reason for it. A good one. Just trust me until the Reverend gets here. Can you do that?" Trust him? She had known him for less than 12 hours. He was a drifter, a man with a gun, and no past he was willing to speak of. And he was proposing marriage as casually as if he were asking for another cup of coffee. Her hand instinctively went to the shotgun, still leaning against the wall. He saw the movement, and his eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Eliza, I swear on my life I mean you no harm. This is to protect you." Before she could form a coherent response, he gave a curt nod, turned and walked out the door, leaving her standing in stunned silence. She watched from the window as he walked west toward the spot where he'd said his horse went down. The sheer audacity of the man was breathtaking. He had turned her world upside down, and then simply walked away, leaving her to grapple with the wreckage. The next few hours were a torment. Eliza paced the cabin like a caged animal. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. 1,000 scenarios played out in her mind. Was he an outlaw looking to legitimize a claim on her land? A madman. She went outside, the morning air, cool and damp against her skin. The damage from the storm was significant. The broken fence was a gaping wound in her property, and debris was scattered everywhere. The work was overwhelming. She saw him in the distance walking back, leading a limping bay horse. He moved with that same unhurried, purposeful stride. He gave her a wide berth, merely nodding as he led the horse to the barn to tend to it. He didn't press her, didn't try to explain further. He gave her space an act that was in itself more disarming than any argument he could have made. True to his word, by mid-morning, he was riding her mare, Gracie, toward redemption. Eliza watched him go until he was a small speck on the horizon, her heart a tangled knot of fear and a bewildering, inexplicable curiosity. What reason could there possibly be? The wait was agonizing. She tried to work clearing branches from the yard, but her mind was elsewhere. Every sound, every gust of wind made her jump. Finally, just after noon, she saw a rider approaching. Not Jed, but a stout, familiar figure on a grey mule. Reverend Michael. The Reverend was a kind man in his late 50s, with a round, weathered face and gentle eyes that had seen more than their share of hardship in this town. He'd presided over Samuel's funeral, his words a small comfort in a sea of pain. He dismounted, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "Eliza, I received a most peculiar message. A man I've never seen before, a Mr. Stone, paid a boy to fetch me, said it was urgent. Is everything all right? I don't know, Reverend," she stammered, feeling foolish and frantic. "A man stayed here last night. He was caught in the storm." Just then a second rider appeared, cresting the rise. It was Jed riding Gracie at a steady pace. He dismounted and walked toward them, his presence immediately dominating the space. He took off his hat, nodding respectfully to the preacher. "Reverend." "Thank you for coming so quickly," Jed said. Reverend Michael looked from Jed's imposing figure to Eliza's pale face. "Young man, you've caused this poor woman a great deal of distress." "What is the meaning of this?" Jed didn't look at the preacher. His eyes were fixed on Eliza. "I told you this was to protect you. Now it's time I explained why." He took a deep breath. "Reverend Mrs. Barrow, my name is Jedediah Stone, but that's not the name I was born with. I was born Jedediah Griffith." Eliza felt as if the ground had dropped out from under her. Griffith. The name was poison in this valley. Cyrus Griffith, the vulture who was trying to steal her home. The Reverend's eyebrows shot up. Cyrus Griffith's brother. The one who ran off? My heavens, that must have been 15 years ago. "We all thought you were dead." "That was the general idea," Jed said grimly. "I had a falling out with my brother. A serious one. I left and never looked back. But I've kept track of him. I know what he's become." He turned his full attention to Eliza, his voice dropping, compelling her to listen. "Eliza, Cyrus doesn't just want your land. He feels entitled to it. He's telling folks in town that your husband Samuel died, owing him a great deal of money. He's fabricated a debt, a loan document he says Samuel signed years ago, and he's using it to petition the circuit judge to seize your property as payment." Tears of helpless fury sprang to Eliza's eyes. "That's a lie. Samuel would never. We never took a dime from that man." "I know," Jed said softly, "and I can prove it." From an inside pocket of his duster, he pulled a small oilskin-wrapped packet. He carefully unwrapped it and produced a folded, yellowed piece of paper. "This is a page from one of my father's old ledgers, from before he died. I took it with me when I left. It details a land use agreement between my father and yours, Eliza. And at the bottom, marked in my father's own hand, is a final entry, debt paid in full, April 14th, 1873. All accounts settled." Samuel didn't owe Cyrus a thing. In fact, it was the other way around. Cyrus has hidden this ledger, pretending it was lost in a fire. Eliza stared at the paper, her mind reeling. The elegant, old-fashioned script was a ghost from the past, a truth she never knew existed. "But how does this lead to marriage?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Here Jed's expression became hard as granite. "Because Cyrus is a snake. He'll bury this document in court. He'll bribe witnesses. He'll pay off the judge. He has the money and the influence to make a lie the truth. A piece of paper won't be enough to stop him. He will drag you through mud and ruin you, and in the end, he will win. It's what he does." He took a step closer, his eyes burning with an intensity that made it hard for her to breathe. "But there is one thing he can't fight. One thing the law respects above all else in these matters: family. He can petition to seize the land of a debtor's widow, but he cannot seize the land of his own sister-in-law. If you marry me, you become a Griffith. This homestead becomes the property of a Griffith. His claim, his fabricated debt, it all turns to dust. He wouldn't be able to touch you or this place. It's a fortress wall he could never breach. A stunned silence fell over the yard, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Reverend Michael looked utterly flabbergasted, his mouth slightly agape. Eliza's head was spinning. A marriage of convenience, a sham illegal maneuver to protect her home. It was insane. It was unthinkable. It was a devil's bargain offered by a man who was himself half devil, half stranger. I am asking you. Eliza. Jedediah. Griffith said, his voice low and steady, a bedrock of certainty in her swirling sea of chaos, to enter into a partnership. A marriage on paper. To let me use my name, the one thing my brother can't take from me, as a shield to protect what is rightfully yours. It is the only way. The proposal, stark and unbelievable, echoed in the silent yard. Eliza felt the Reverend's worried gaze on her, but her own eyes were locked on Jedediah Griffith. He stood there calm and resolute, as if he'd just proposed a business merger instead of a lifelong vow. Her mind, a whirlwind of disbelief moments before, was now racing frantically, trying to piece together the logic of his insane plan. This is a trick, she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. This has to be some kind of Griffith trick. You show up out of nowhere in a storm, and now you want to marry me to save me from your own brother. Why? Why would you do anything to help me? Jed's jaw tightened. Because I hate my brother. He said the words laced with a bitterness so profound it felt ancient. I hate what he stands for, what he did to our family name, and what he's trying to do to you. Cyrus believes the world is his for the taking. For once, I want to see him try to take something and fail. This isn't just about you, Eliza. This is about him. His honesty was as brutal as it was disarming. He wasn't pretending to be a white knight. This was about revenge. She was a weapon in his private war. The thought was chilling, yet it also made a strange kind of sense. It was a motive she could understand far better than charity. Before she could process it further, another horseman appeared, riding at a determined clip from the direction of town. It was Sheriff Brody, his silver badge glinting in the noon sun. A tall, leathery man with a perpetually weary expression. Brody had been sheriff in Redemption for 20 years. He was a man who operated not on ideals, but on the grim realities of his jurisdiction. He pulled his horse to a halt, his sharp eyes taking in the scene, Eliza pale and shaken, the Reverend looking utterly lost, and the tall, imposing stranger. Reverend Brody said, his voice a gravelly drawl. Got your message? Said there was trouble out at the Barrow place. What in blazes is going on here? His eyes narrowed on Jed. And who might you be, friend? He says his name is Jedediah Griffith. The Reverend supplied his voice, trembling slightly. Sheriff Brody went still. He stared at Jed, his gaze traveling from the worn boots to the hard lines of his face, to the familiar stubborn set of his jaw. A long, heavy silence passed. Well, I'll be damned, Brody breathed, swinging down from his horse. Jed Griffith, we all buried you a long time ago. Last I heard, you were on the wrong end of a rope in Texas. The rumors of my death were convenient for some. Jed said, his tone dry. It's good to see you, Brody. Can't say the same. The sheriff grumbled, though there was a flicker of something that might have been relief in his eyes. You always meant trouble. He turned to Eliza. Ma'am, is this man bothering you? He's made me a proposition, Sheriff, Eliza said, finding her voice. A marriage proposition. Brody blinked, his professional weariness finally cracking. A what? Jed, with remarkable patience, laid out the entire story again. Cyrus's fabricated debt, the ledger page, and his proposed solution of a marriage of convenience. Brody listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask, occasionally stroking his mustache. When Jed was finished, Brody let out a long sigh and kicked at a loose stone with the toe of his boot. It's true about Cyrus. The sheriff confirmed his gaze, meeting Eliza's. He's been sniffing around your claim since Samuel passed. Filed a preliminary debt claim with the circuit judge 2 weeks ago. All nice and legal. I looked into it, but without proof to the contrary, the judge is likely to grant it. Griffith has deep pockets. He looked back at Jed. And your plan. Hell, it's crazy. But it's the kind of crazy that just might work. Legally, he's right, Eliza. A judge won't let a man seize property from his own kin based on a contested family debt. It would get tied up in probate for years, and Cyrus wants this land now before the railroad survey is finalized. The railroad? Of course. Cyrus wasn't just collecting property. He was speculating. Eliza's land with its abundant water would be worth 10 times its current value if the railroad came through nearby. I don't trust him, Eliza stated flatly, gesturing toward Jed. He's still a Griffith. And that's the bitter irony of it, isn't it? Jed said, stepping forward. He spoke directly to her, his voice low and intense, ignoring the other 2 men. Eliza, look at me. I am not asking for your trust. I am not asking for your affection. I am offering you a business arrangement, a shield. I will be your husband in name only. I will work this land with you, stand with you against my brother, and when he is defeated and your claim is secure, I will sign any paper you wish to annul the marriage. I will disappear from your life as quickly as I appeared. You have my word. He held out his hands, palms up. They were strong hands, calloused and capable. The hands of a man who worked. This is your choice. You can take a chance on me, a stranger who offers you a fighting chance. Or you can place your faith in the law, which my brother has already bought and paid for, and lose everything Samuel built for you. There is no other option. The devil's bargain laid bare. It was a choice between 2 impossibilities. To marry a man she didn't know, a man born of the very family that sought to ruin her, or to stand by and watch as Cyrus Griffith, with his smug smile and legal machinations, ripped her life out from under her. But as she looked at Jedediah Griffith, she saw more than just his brother's name. She saw the man who had calmed her terrified horse in the heart of a storm. She saw the weariness in his eyes that spoke of a long, hard road, and she saw the cold, hard glint of a man bent on a righteous revenge. Perhaps, just perhaps, his war and her war could be one and the same. She drew herself up, the familiar barrow stubbornness settling in her bones like a rock. There will be conditions, she said, her voice clear and steady, surprising even herself. A flicker of a smile touched Jed's lips for the first time. I would expect nothing less. "This is a partnership, nothing more," she declared, looking him straight in the eye. "You will sleep in the barn. We work the land together. We make decisions together. And the moment Cyrus Griffith is no longer a threat, you leave." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. She turned to the stunned Reverend Michael, who looked as if he were about to faint. "Reverend, it seems you have a wedding to conduct." Sheriff Brody simply shook his head, a look of grim resignation on his face. "Lord help us all," he muttered, pushing his hat back on his head. "This is going to be one hell of a fight." The wedding was the strangest ceremony Redemption had ever seen, though its only witnesses were the sun-bleached prairie grass and the grim-faced sheriff. Reverend Michael, looking deeply uncomfortable, stood before the porch of the small cabin, his Bible held in trembling hands. He had tried to argue for a proper service in the church, for waiting periods and counseling, but Jed had been insistent. It had to be now before Cyrus got wind of his return and could concoct a new legal poison. Eliza stood beside Jedediah, feeling a surreal detachment, as if she were watching a play about someone else's life. She wore her simple blue work dress, the one she'd patched twice at the elbow. Jed stood tall and unmoving in his trail-worn clothes. He was her bridegroom, yet he felt as distant as a star. Sheriff Brody stood off to the side. His arms crossed his presence, lending a bizarre official gravity to the affair. The Reverend rushed through the vows, his voice a nervous murmur against the vast silence of the plains. When he reached the part about "for richer, for poorer," Eliza nearly let out a bitter laugh. When he asked if anyone had cause why these two should not be joined. All three of them instinctively glanced toward the horizon, half expecting Cyrus Griffith to appear on a black horse breathing fire. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend finished, snapping his Bible shut with a sigh of profound relief, as if he had just wrestled a rattlesnake. There was no kiss, there was no celebration. Jed simply turned to her and gave a short, formal nod. "Mrs. Griffith," he said, the name sounding alien. "Mr. Griffith," she replied, her voice flat. And with that, the war began. News of the marriage spread through Redemption like a prairie fire. Jed had made sure of it, filing a copy of the marriage certificate at the courthouse himself that afternoon. By evening, the entire valley was buzzing. Martha, the owner of the general store and the town's primary hub of information, nearly fainted when Sheriff Brody confirmed the rumor. The widow Barrow married to a stranger, to a Griffith. It was the most scandalous, delicious piece of news in years. The reaction from the Griffith ranch was not long in coming. The next afternoon, as Jed and Eliza were working together to reset the posts for the broken fence, a cloud of dust appeared on the road. At its head were three riders led by a large, imposing man on a magnificent black stallion. "That'll be him," Jed said, not stopping his work of tamping dirt around a new post. His voice was calm, but Eliza saw the muscles in his back and shoulders bunch and tighten. She straightened up, her heart pounding against her ribs, her hands suddenly slick with sweat. Cyrus Griffith was even more formidable in person than in rumor. He was a bull of a man with a florid face, a thick neck and pale, cold eyes that missed nothing. He reined his horse in just outside the new fence line, his two hired men flanking him, their hands resting near their pistols. "Well, well," Cyrus boomed, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. "The prodigal brother returns. I heard you'd crawled out from whatever rock you were hiding under, and married a squatter. Have you fallen so far, Jedediah?" "Hello, Cyrus," Jed replied, leaning on his tamping rod. "This is my wife, Eliza Griffith. And this is our land. I'd thank you to remember that." Cyrus's eyes raked over Eliza, a look of such contempt on his face that she felt a hot flush of anger. "Wife, don't make me laugh. This is a sham, and we both know it. You think this pathetic little trick will stop me? I have a legal claim against this land. Samuel Barrow died in my debt." "No, he didn't," Jed said calmly. "He didn't produce the ledger page. That was his ace in the hole not to be played this early in the game. He died a free man, and now his widow is my wife. Her property is my property. You want to make a claim, you make it against me. In court." Cyrus's face purpled with rage. "You have nothing. You are nothing. You walked away from your birthright like a coward. I built this empire while you were wallowing in filth. You built it on lies and threats." Brother Jed shot back his voice, taking on a hard, dangerous edge. "You tried to have me hanged for a cattle-rustling scheme that you engineered. You cheated our neighbors. You drove our father into an early grave with your greed. You talk about filth. You should look in a mirror." The accusation hung in the air, raw and shocking. Eliza stared at Jed. Framed for rustling. This was the root of their feud, a betrayal far deeper than she could have imagined. Cyrus was momentarily speechless, his fury so great he could barely breathe. "You will regret this," he finally snarled, pointing a thick finger at them. "Both of you. This land will be mine. I will see you broken and begging." He yanked his horse's reins, wheeling the stallion around, so violently it reared. He and his men thundered off, leaving a cloud of dust and hatred behind them. Eliza let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She looked at Jed, seeing him in a new light. He wasn't just an estranged brother. He was a man who had been deeply wronged, who had narrowly escaped death at his own brother's hand. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "What you said about him framing you?" Jed's face was a grim mask. "Every word. He wanted me gone. He wanted it all for himself. He almost succeeded. In the days that followed, a tense, undeclared war settled over the valley. Cyrus couldn't touch them legally, not yet, so he resorted to a campaign of attrition. Their supply wagon from Redemption was accidentally overturned. A dam upstream on the creek was suddenly built up, reducing their water flow to a trickle. Whispers spread through town that Jed was a dangerous outlaw, that Eliza had been coerced. But Cyrus had underestimated them both. Jed, it turned out, was not just a drifter. He was a brilliant strategist. He had spent 15 years living by his wits, and he knew how to fight a guerrilla war. He rerouted a smaller spring to feed their fields, a back-breaking task they worked on together from sunup to sundown. He anticipated Cyrus's moves, sending Eliza to town for supplies a day before the wagon was due to be harassed. And Eliza, who had fought for 2 years to survive, found a new strength. She was no longer just defending a memory. She was in a real fight with an ally at her side. She and Jed worked in a seamless, unspoken rhythm. There was no romance, no gentle touches. Theirs was a partnership forged in sweat dirt and a shared enemy. They spoke of crop rotation, water levels, and Cyrus's latest move. Yet in the quiet evenings, as they sat on opposite sides of the hearth, a grudging respect began to grow. She saw his cleverness, his resilience. He saw her unbending will, her deep love for the land. One evening he was repairing a piece of tack in the barn which he had turned into a sparse but comfortable living space. Eliza brought him a plate of food. "You never told me how you got away," she said, standing in the doorway. Jed didn't look up from his work. Sheriff Brody. He was a deputy then. He never believed Cyrus. He looked the other way for half a day. Gave me a head start. Told me to ride and never come back. But you did, she said. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers in the lantern light. Some things, he said, his voice low. You can't run from forever. She understood. She had been trying to hold on to a past while he had been running from one. Now here they were in this strange, false marriage, fighting for a future. And for the first time, Eliza realized with a jolt that the thought of him leaving when this was all over filled her with a profound and unsettling sense of dread. The war of attrition dragged on into the late summer. The valley was dry, the air thick with tension. Cyrus Griffith's tactics grew bolder, more desperate. He couldn't break them, and it was driving him mad. Jed and Eliza had created an unbreakable rhythm, a partnership that was more real and solid than most actual marriages in redemption. They were a united front, and Cyrus couldn't find a crack to exploit. The final gambit came, as Jed knew it would, over water. The aquifer that fed the main Griffith ranch also fed the creek on Eliza's property. It was their shared lifeblood. Jed had been meticulously documenting the diminished water flow since Cyrus had built the illegal dam. He had maps he'd drawn from memory of his father's original surveys, showing the natural course of the springs. This would be the battleground. He's getting squeezed, Jed explained to Eliza one evening, poring over his maps on the cabin table. The railroad survey is nearly complete, and the rumors are true. The main line is coming through the south end of the valley. To get the price he wants for his land, he needs to show unimpeachable water rights. Our claim, small as it is a thorn in his side. He needs to erase it. He needs to own it all. So what's his move? Eliza asked, her trust in his strategic mind now absolute. He'll get impatient. He'll do something rash, something illegal that he can't deny. Jed said, a glint in his eye. And we need to be there when he does. With a witness. The plan was simple and dangerous. Jed rode into town and paid a quiet visit to Sheriff Brody. He laid out the maps, the water logs, the ledger page. He's going to make his move in the next few days, Brody. He's going to try and dynamite the head of our spring, permanently divert the water flow to his own property. He'll claim it was a natural rock slide. I need you there when it happens. Brody looked at the evidence, then at Jed's determined face. This is a hell of a risk, Jed. If he sees you, he won't hesitate to shoot. I'm counting on it, Jed said grimly. For 2 nights they watched. They took turns sleeping, stationing themselves in a rocky outcrop that overlooked the spring's source on the edge of their property. It was a tense, silent vigil. On the 3rd night, under the sliver of a crescent moon, they saw them, 3 figures on horseback, moving without lights, carrying heavy sacks. Cyrus and his 2 hired guns. It's time, Jed whispered to Eliza. Stay here. No matter what you hear, you stay here. Brody is waiting just over that ridge. He'll make his move when he has to. Jed, be careful, she said, her hand instinctively reaching for his arm. It was the first time she had touched him, voluntarily, outside of work. The contact was like a jolt of lightning. He looked down at her hand, then back to her face, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Always, he said, and then he was gone, melting into the shadows like a ghost. Eliza watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw Jed circle around, taking up a position on the opposite side of the clearing, where Cyrus and his men were now working, setting dynamite charges near the rocks. The fuse was lit, a small, sputtering spark in the immense darkness. Just as Cyrus was turning to leave, Jed stepped out from behind a boulder. "That's far enough." Brother Jed's voice rang out, clear and cold. Cyrus spun around his face, a mask of shock and fury in the moonlight. "You?" He snarled, his hand immediately going for his gun. "It's over, Cyrus," Jed said, not moving his own pistol, remaining holstered. "I know about the dynamite, and I know about the ledger, the real one." He held up the oilskin packet. "The one that says Samuel Barrow's debt was paid in full 15 years ago." For a moment, Cyrus froze. He stared at the packet, then at his brother's face, and he knew he was beaten. The legal battle was lost. But Cyrus Griffith was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a cornered animal. "If I can't have this land, no one will," he roared, and instead of drawing on Jed, he pulled a rifle from his saddle. He wasn't aiming at Jed. He was aiming at the dynamite. A well-placed shot would set it off prematurely, burying Jed the spring, and the evidence in 1,000 tons of rock. It happened in a flash. As Cyrus raised the rifle, a shot rang out, but it wasn't from Cyrus. It was from the ridge. Sheriff Brody. The rifle flew from Cyrus's hand as he cried out, clutching a shattered wrist. His 2 men, seeing the sheriff and 2 deputies emerge from the darkness with shotguns leveled, immediately threw their hands in the air. It was over. Cyrus, cradling his broken wrist, his face contorted in a mask of pain and hate, glared at Jed. You will rot for this." "No, Cyrus." Jed said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that went beyond their fight. "You rotted a long time ago." As the dawn broke, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, Sheriff Brody led a defeated Cyrus Griffith and his men away in handcuffs. The valley was quiet, peaceful. The threat was gone. Jed walked back to the outcrop where Eliza was waiting. She ran the last few steps, stopping just before him, her eyes searching his face. The war was won. Their bargain was complete. According to their terms, he was free to go. The realization landed in her heart like a lead weight. "So that's it then," she said, her voice small. "You'll be leaving." Jed looked at the homestead, bathed in the gentle morning light. He looked at the sturdy cabin, the mended fence, the land that they had fought for together. Then he looked at her. "The deal was, I'd leave when the threat was gone," he said slowly. "But the deal was based on a lie." "A lie?" she asked, confused. "I told you I came back for revenge." "And that was part of it," he admitted. "But it wasn't the whole truth. I came back because I was tired of running. I saw your light in the storm, and it was the first thing that felt like a home in 15 years. I made up the plan about the marriage on the ride to redemption, because when I saw Cyrus's notice on your wall, I knew I couldn't just ride away. I couldn't let him do to you what he did to me." He took a hesitant step closer. "Eliza, this started as a partnership of convenience, but for me, it's become something more. This place, working this land with you, it's the only thing that's ever felt real. I know our bargain, but I have to ask, does it have to be over?" He was no longer just the drifter from the storm or the avenging brother. He was Jed, the man who had stood with her, fought for her, and respected her. He was the man who had, against all odds, captured her heart. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes, but for the first time in a very long time, they were not tears of grief or fear. They were tears of hope. "The drifter I let in during the storm is gone," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But my husband, Jedediah Griffith, is standing right here. And I think I'd like him to stay." A slow smile spread across Jed's face, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his harsh features and made him look like the man he was always meant to be. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. Together they stood and watched the sun rise over their land, their future as vast and full of promise as the Montana sky. And so a union born from a tempest and forged in conflict found its peace in the quiet light of a new day. The story of Eliza and Jedediah isn't just about a fight for land. It's about the battles we all face. It's about whether we let our pasts define us, or if we have the courage to build a new future even with a stranger. They discovered that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most profound rewards, and that a home is not just a place you own, but a person you fight for. What do you think? Was Eliza right to trust him, or was it the biggest gamble of her life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by their story, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales from the heart of the Wild West. Thanks for listening.